right, so we got Bill from Staten Island, we got Stephen, me, Teresa, Marion. Greetings, Marion, good to see you. And of course, the people here. All right, so let's just give a summary of this lecture. Emotional growth and its function. Well, feelings, I'm the will type, I'm the intellectual type, I guess, the reason type. So I've never been that comfortable with feelings, I have to confess. I remember this great story. I was a science fiction fan, and there's a story about a guy named Professor Jameson who wants to be immortal. So the professor puts his body in a block of quartz and sends it into Earth orbit. And 20,000 years later, or maybe 20 million years later, I'm not sure if it matters. The Earth is, it's all over, the Earth is gone, human beings are extinct, but guess what? Professor Jameson is still orbiting in his quartz coffin. So a bunch of traveling aliens, starship travelers called the Zoromes, who are robots, they show up and they resuscitate Professor Jameson, and they put his brain into one of their electronic bodies. So he gets to roam the galaxy forever, experiencing strange new worlds and new civilizations. And I thought that was a wonderful, ideal existence. You didn't have to worry about your body. You were invulnerable.
You just worry about your mind.
And you could just no feelings. You could just explore the cosmos forever.
That awaits us.
And so I was kind of like, Elon Musk is probably on that vibe and some of these guys, but I was thinking, wow, just to be able to contemplate the cosmos without having to worry about the body and the feelings that go with it. Yeah.
Sign me up, right?
Sign me up. Sign me up. So now this lecture, now we always talk about the four aspects, right? The mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. But in this lecture, the guide talks primarily about three aspects: the physical, the emotional, and the mental. And he seems to say, correct me if I'm wrong, that to really be a spiritual person, to be evolved spiritually, you have to also have emotional maturity. So these four aspects are not completely separate. The spirituality depends on the maturity of the emotional self. So that's what a lot of the lecture is about. All right, lecture 89. In the beginning, the guide basically presents the human personality as mental, physical, and emotional. And he says that whereas, of course, we're pretty okay developing the mental and the physical, we seem to have problems developing the emotional side of our natures. Right, I mean, mentally, we obviously have to learn the ABCs to survive. We have to get jobs. We have to think our way around problems. That's kind of necessary. Oh, it's Ellen.
It's who?
Ellen White. And physically, of course, we kind of have a similar obligation. If we don't get ourselves together physically, we're not going to survive. Hi, Ellen. Hey, good to see you. But when it comes to the emotions, it's harder. So the guide asks, page 1, why is the emotional nature generally neglected? There are good reasons for that, my friends. Basically, the guide says that in childhood, we discovered that we had two kinds of feelings. We had happy feelings, joyful feelings, and we had pain and suffering. And we didn't want to feel the pain and the suffering. So what we did is we dulled our emotions. He says, what is the function of the emotional nature in human beings? It includes, first of all, the capacity to feel. The capacity to experience feeling is synonymous with the capacity to give and receive happiness. To the degree you shy away from any kind of emotional experience, to that extent, you also close the door to the experience of happiness. All right, well, that's the whole thing, really. In other words, we shy away from emotional experience because we don't want to face the unhappiness and the pain. And when we do that, when we numb ourselves out, we numb our ability to experience happiness too and creativity. So, and the guide, of course, links emotional health, emotional maturity to creativity. You know, I think of all the artists that were famously stunted emotionally and how much they were able to create. I mean, Van Gogh, right? I mean, a lot of tortured artists, Schubert, I guess. The list goes on. A lot of authors, famously, Virginia Woolf, emotionally challenged, but still able to create. And you wonder if they had been able to experience more feelings in a flowing way, how much more they would have been able to create. That's what the guide implies anyway. All right, so as the guide says, that when pain occurs, the child comes to the conclusion, if I don't feel, then I will not be unhappy. The personality then dulls the capacity for feeling, but this withdrawal from emotions does not end on happiness. Rather, it adds to it. So we kind of get caught in a bind, right? We think we're doing something to shield ourselves from unhappiness, but in actual fact, we create more of it, and we create loneliness, and we create isolation, separation. There's another reason why we deaden our emotional nature. In other words, another reason other than to avoid pain. That reason is because we're afraid of the destructive emotions we have. Right? I mean, as we all know from the Pathwork, the little child is angry and resentful of stuff. Another child gets more than the individual, than that child. He wants to kill the child. He's angry. He doesn't get what he wants. He's furious. He's going to take care of business. And so, in other words, another reason we dull the emotions is because we don't want to come to grips with the destructive emotions that exist. All right, so, and then we come to the third concept in this lecture, which of course is very important, the idealized self-image, right? We don't want to experience our immature emotions. So instead we pretend we don't have them. We create an idealized self-image, a kind of perfect image, picture of Dorian Gray, or something that it's like a kind of a facade. It's a replica, but it's not real. It's who we wish we could be. It's an invulnerable kind of super being that we pretend to be. And that's what the guide calls the idealized self-image. All right, well, that covers the first 3 pages. Then the guide on, I believe it's the 5th page, I'm moving quickly now, right? It talks about the solutions to this conundrum that we find ourselves in, that are deadening our feelings. He says, the solution is, well, first of all, we have to realize the difference between feeling these feelings and acting them out. We don't have to act out our negativity, right? Solution, try to distinguish between constructive and destructive aims. Try to realize the purpose of exposing your emotions, and then develop the courage and humility to allow yourself to be aware of what you really feel and to express it when it is meaningful. So, I mean, it's kind of a conundrum because, as we often say in these discussions, you know, the ego or the intellect doesn't really understand the emotions. You know, we sort of have separate spheres that we inhabit. And when you talk about experiencing emotions and not acting out, the ego, the idealized self-image, doesn't really even want to go there. Idealized self-image doesn't want to have to experience destructive emotions because it doesn't believe it has them. But of course it does. So try to distinguish between constructive and destructive aims. So the message throughout this lecture is to experience the emotions that you didn't experience at an earlier stage. And if you can experience those emotions, then you can get beyond them and get beyond the deadening of emotions, and get beyond the idealized self-image. What has not been properly assimilated in emotional experience, but instead has been repressed, will constantly be reactivated by present situations. Now that's the images, right? In other words, why do we keep getting triggered? Because of these wrong conclusions that we have reached, these images that we have deep in our psyches, in our souls. These are things that continuously get reactivated because we haven't examined them. We haven't allowed the emotions to come out. We haven't allowed the emotions to be expressed. And as the guide says also in this lecture, in the pathwork, we have learned how to express negative and destructive emotions without destroying anything or hurting anything. We've learned how to get into those feelings in a therapeutic kind of situation, like a helper session, let's say, or a pathwork group. It's interesting because this lecture is, of course, one of the almost purely psychological lectures. There's no discussion about cosmology or the spirit world in this lecture. It's all about our psyches and about our own inner struggles of self-facing. So the only way emotions can mature, the guide says, page 6, by going through the period that was missed in childhood and adolescence, the emotions will finally mature and you will no longer need to fear the power of those emotions, which you cannot control merely by putting them out of awareness. So, I mean, that's the idealized self-image strategy. It puts the emotions out of awareness. And, probably Professor Jameson did that too, but he didn't have to worry about the emotions because he was on an interstellar voyage. Didn't need them. All right, so then he says that if you are able to go through these emotions, experience the emotions that you suppressed, resisted, then they will mature and you will be able to trust them and to be guided by them, for that is the final aim of the mature and well-functioning person, to trust your emotions and be guided by them, right? Because isn't there a similarity, or is it the same thing, emotions and intuition? You're in a situation and you're not sure how to react. Are you coming from your images? Are you coming from your idealized self-image? Or are you coming from your intuition, which is based on matured emotions? Are you correctly perceiving the situation? So, that's the clue, right? The guide says that the purpose of the daily review is you note down the disharmony that you experience during the day. And then you mention it, you note it, and then you see how these patterns repeat. You're in a situation like, Tracy, you've experienced a lot of probably heavy duty, stressful situations in corporate America. So something's happening, something's going down. How do you react? Do you react from mature emotions where you feel confident and you feel secure in your own identity and your intuition about what you should do? Or are you reacting to the power dynamics or the struggles? Or are you coming from your idealized self-image where, you're denying that you're not perfect? So as your emotions mature, your intuition develops and your disharmony diminishes because you're able to react from a true place where you feel secure and you feel the unit of spirit, right? You're not in conflict. All right. Now, another note here about the idealized self-image on the same page, he says, you will also learn to discriminate between genuine good feelings and false good feelings that you superimpose out of the need to maintain your idealized self-image. Quote, this is the way I should be, unquote. Because you cling to this idealized self-image, you cannot find your real self and do not have the courage to accept that a comparatively large area of your personality is still childish, incomplete, and imperfect, it falls considerably short of what you want to appear to be. That's the idealized self-image. Okay. So then the next section at the end of page 6, he talks about building true security. And I think I just recapped that when I talked about maturing emotions and intuition. He says, and this is a very basic Pathwork message that echoes through all the lectures, quote, "You have nothing to fear from becoming aware of what is already in you. Looking away from what is, does not cause it to cease to exist," which is, of course, the opposite of what you don't know can't hurt you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, therefore, it is wise on your part to want to look at, to face, and to acknowledge what is in you, no more and no less. To believe it harms you more to know what you feel and are than not to know is extremely foolish. We'll buy that, right? We'll buy that. Okay. So the guide reiterates that on the next page, page 7. You will soon discover the fallacy that there is a danger in becoming aware of and expressing childish emotions. There is danger only if you let them get out of control and express them without the discipline of having a specific aim, namely that of gaining insights about your inner self in a meaningful experience. So we don't have to fear exposure if we're able to express these immature emotions and come to terms with them, express them in a safe way. All right. Yeah, as he says, it is not enough to say that there is no danger in such constructive activity. That is the activity of bringing these emotions into consciousness. It is the only way to alleviate the danger of your insecurity and of your pretense, which you sense all the time and which makes you even more insecure and fearful of exposure. Deep inside, you know of your pretense, of your false maturity, of your idealized self-image, and you tremble because you know it, and you think you defend it by continuing to close your eyes to it. You think you can whisk away the falsity by not acknowledging it. Actually, the truth is that you can grow out of the falsity only by, first of all, accepting its existence at the present time and owning up to it. And then and only then can you build a genuine self you can meet and you could trust and rely on. Then you do not have to fear exposure. All right, so the final section here, the way I see it is now at this point, at the end of middle page 7, the guide brings in spirituality. Finally, right? Let us consider the subject in the light of spirituality. You all have come originally with the idea of growing spiritually. I might say that more or less all of you hope to accomplish this without tending to your emotional growth. You want to believe that the one is possible without the other. Needless to say, this is a complete impossibility. So, while Professor Jameson in his Robot Body might have really dug exploring the cosmos and believed that this was truly spiritual to interact with all these evolved beings, in fact, he was just running away from his emotions, and it wasn't happening. So he says, you want to believe that one is possible without the other, namely, spirituality is possible without emotional growth. Needless to say, this is a complete impossibility. Sooner or later, you'll reach the point where you have to make up your mind as to whether you really want emotional growth or you still want to cling to the childish hope and that spiritual growth is possible while you neglect the world of feeling and allow it to lie dormant without giving it the opportunity to grow. So,
I'm sorry, I gotta interrupt you for a second. There's a really hip term for that now. It's spiritual bypassing.
spiritual bypassing.
I just had to say that. Okay.
That's when
Spiritual bypass?
bypassing, that's when you
It's a very hip term now in the other spiritual communities.
bypass, you mean the emotional maturity
Yeah,
of
it's
death?
exactly what you're talking about. It's when you bypass your emotional
Yeah,
focus
yeah,
for the spiritual to go up into
yeah,
the spiritual
yeah,
realms. I just
yeah, that's right. Well, the guide often says, that, you can't expect to float above your emotions and pretend that you don't have to deal with them. Uh, and that you can simply become spiritual and ignore that. Yeah, that's right. So then the guy talks about the L word, love, you know. Um, love is the first and greatest power. In the last analysis, it is the only power. Most of you have used this maxim many times, but I wonder, my friends, if you ever knew that you were using empty words, veering away from feeling, reacting, and experiencing. Yeah, the guy doesn't mince words, right?
Not in this
Nice.
letter.
Certainly
Sure.
not.
That's heavy right there.
Wow, this
He
lecture
says,
was-
now, how can you love if you do not let yourself feel? How can you love if you do not let yourself feel? How can you love and at the same time remain what you choose to call detached? That means personally uninvolved, not risking pain, disappointment, personal involvement. All right. Love is not an intellectual process, he says. Is love a lukewarm matter of laws, words, letters, regulations, and rules? Or is love a feeling that comes from deep within the soul, a warmth of flowing impact that cannot leave you indifferent and untouched? So the guide says he says, you begin to see how you all sit back, hoping for a comfortable spirituality that leaves out your personal involvement in the world of feelings. After you see this clearly, you will comprehend how preposterous this attitude is. And after the end of the lecture, the first question, the question is a faith in God and love without emotional maturity possible? Answer, that is impossible. If we speak about real love, the willingness to be personally involved and not about the childish need to be loved and cherished, which is so often confused with love. That's a very important sentence, I think, right? Very. The willingness to be personally involved and not about the childish need to be loved and cherished, which is so often confused with love. Right? Because if you're loving me, cherishing me, taking care of me, then I'm loved and I love you and everything is great. But as he says later on, true love and true faith come out of strength, self-reliance, and self-responsibility. So all these are attributes of emotional maturity. And only with strength, self-reliance, and self-responsibility are true love, involvement, and faith possible. Anyone who ever attained spiritual growth, known or unknown in history, had to have emotional maturity. So that's really important to bear in mind. The guide talks about self-responsibility, self-reliance. It's really a call to strengthen ourselves as, the greater ego versus the little ego, to strengthen our intuition, to make ourselves independent of others so that we can give to others, right? Not trying to get it from others or from the outside, but having the strength within to give out. And then I think we achieve emotional maturity. So that's my take on this lecture. Yeah, it's kind of a big, when you think about it, the disharmony that one experiences day to day, right? That one is what's the word? Abjured to write down in the daily review. The things that happen. I'm just thinking about these flashpoints, these reactions to situations that we have. And why do we react the way we do? How much do outer events obsess us and bother us? How much do we hook into conflicts? And how much can we let go and find our intuition? So this lecture is about that. And it is challenging to meet your emotions, your negative emotions. And the Pathwork sessions, the Pathwork groups are obviously a way to do that, but few of us are in these groups and sessions today. So that brings up the issue about how we can deal with these emotions without that kind of a setting. And maybe that's something we could talk about. But yeah, let's share our thoughts about this lecture. This very psychological lecture that puts forward a requirement for spirituality, which is emotional maturity. And I couldn't help, I'm sorry, I'm going to just digress here, but I can't help thinking about the evangelicals, and their spirituality, or what they term spirituality, with a lot of emotional immaturity. I mean, there's so much anger out there. You can't have spirituality allied with anger. I'm not talking about like justified anger, the famous throwing over of the tables of the money changers, right? But I'm talking about just anger, demonization of people, hatred. And yet these people call themselves spiritual. So if emotional maturity were truly a requirement to be led into church, there'd be even few people,
There'd be some empty
there's
pews.
some empty pews, that's right.
But the thing is, they may be spiritual, but
Is that-
Somebody's trying to talk.
yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
they're talking about religiosity, not spirituality. I mean,
Yeah.
they're
Oh,
talking about religiousness, which is completely like, this-
right, some kind of code that you have to follow.
it strips it.
The guy said religion, spirituality, and love are one. I always get, you guys gonna like those phrases, right? Religion, spirituality, and love are one. But that is taken in the true sense of these
True
words.
sense. Yes.
All right, so Kev, what are your thoughts?
First, unbelievable summary.
Thank you.
I almost
you.
didn't need to read the lecture. It was so
Yeah.
complete, your summary, honestly. The one word that you used and that connected with the one word that consistently resonated with me on this lecture was touches. On page 2, the guide mentions the phrase emotional experience really touches you. And well, that touched me when I heard that. It touches me to be here, to see faces. It touches me to hear your lecture, summary. Thank you. Yeah, all of that stuff touches me. And I think well, for me, when I read that, I think that helped me to see when I'm putting up those walls, because if I feel as though I'm not being touched by someone, right, it's easy for me to discern if I'm untouchable, if I'm safe, or if I'm trying to act safe, then I'm preventing touch. And, I don't mean always physical, right? It's the emotional touch, but the emotional experience really has that impact. So if I don't feel that impact or that energy coming to me from someone else and impacting me, then I know that I'm not living to the extent that the guide is asking me to do so. In addition, he mentions, where is it here? Right, there's a sentence, one of the areas you read as well on page 7, where it ends off and says, or is love a feeling that comes from deep within the soul, a warmth of flowing impact that cannot leave you indifferent and untouched. So again, it was like, wham, again, bring back the point home again. So yeah, I just find that to be a very valid way of seeing how each day I'm living. Also, last one that really kind of, well, it's that religiosity part that, well, yeah, I guess my path in this incarnation has proven to be challenging on the religiosity front. And, I guess we've all had our connection to it, but yeah, this father authority that it talks about, the fact that it's also out of a need to be protected, that this false religion or this false faith and this false love, it says it always, and that's a big word, always, it
Yeah.
always has the strong emotional connotation of need. And I mean, that is huge, because it's, how do I get this? How do I
Right,
get
right,
my
right.
needs fulfilled without being a part of the link in the chain that the guide talks about in lecture 2? It's how do, how do I get, but I don't need to give at all, So it's, again, I don't want to be impacted. I just want to be safe and receive.
Hmm.
And that's not a way to have life.
That's not a true.
So I think it's a good way of putting it, and it really connected to me. So yeah, those were my 2 big points that kind of impacted me on that. Oh, the last 2, hold on, one other thing on page 1 I forgot, is that it mentions, or he mentions, that the neglect to the emotional is universal. I mean, that's a really large sentence, even though it's small.
Mhm.
The fact that it says, like, it's
Mhm.
very easy for those, at least for me, that I feel as though I'm behind the 8 ball on the emotional side, right? So it's like, other people always have it so much better off, and
We all are behind the
we're-
eight ball.
right. So it's easy for me to judge myself to that end, but then I'm like, when I read that, it was like such a relief almost to hear that we can help each other walk down that road together, but it's not one person only leading the other,
Right.
ever, so that was really reassuring to hear. And the last point I wanted to mention here as well was that on page 1, it starts off and it states pretty clearly that it's just about letting the emotions reach, as the guide says, surface awareness. It's not necessarily this large mystical thing or this huge emotional outlay, or it'll destroy my life if I go through this process. It's just about trying to bring what doesn't reach the level of the surface to the surface. And it could be a small little bit that you give to it, but it will provide an enormous amount of opportunity for further growth. And this is, remember you stated about the helper process, and what it means, right? And it's very important in this first one, I feel. It says, some of you recognize the signs of your own resistance and consciously battle against it. Okay. And I sat with that for a while and thought about that, because to feel your own resistance is the necessary first step, right?
Mhm.
If you're just like, it may not be what you want. You may not be home yet. You may not be in that place where it's like, yeah, I'm doing better on this, but yet you just feel that, yeah, something's wrong. That's a great sign. That's really a great sign, because you're getting to that first step of, and I think that's the most important part, to be honest with you. Once you get that first step, the world kind of opens up from there. So thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said about need. That I read a long profile in The Guardian about women that come together to kind of nurture themselves in a particular way of appearance, expressing they've got dressed a certain way, please their husband in a certain way. This is a kind of Christian evangelical gatherings where it's all about, I need to look a certain way, I need to be a certain way to please people, to fulfill a role. It's very outer directed.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that, right? The connotation of need. In other words, I need someone to fill me up,
It's
as
compulsive,
opposed
right?
to I can find it within,
Yeah,
through the process of self-facing, right?
right.
Yeah, yeah. It's the thing that I keep thinking about, this idea that certain parts of ourselves don't want to hear the other parts. Like the idea that just the statement that I have everything within that I need to fulfill myself, that's something that a lot of our parts of ourselves don't want to hear. I don't want to hear that.
Hmm.
I want to hear that I got to look outside. I got to get it from that guy or this group or this church. I can get it from them and fill myself up. I don't want to know that I really have everything within me I need to fulfill myself. Yeah.
Right.
That's
And that's non-conditional, right?
non-conditional.
It's non-conditional. I'm going through some changes at work right now, and boy, there's a lot of conditions being thrown around all the time, and large-scale changes that are hard to feel comfortable with, let's say, until you kind of process what your emotional response is and how it's coming
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Because there's, as you use a very wise sentence there, it's a part of you that is arising in that way. It's not all of you.
Well, that is, of course,
And,
the guy
yeah.
gives that answer in the one answer in the lecture. Talks about for this child who asks a question. I was kind of
Yeah,
thinking,
that was a great,
like
yes.
who was that? That was 1961.
Ah,
So I'm thinking it wasn't me. I was 5, but it could have been like Sid Schwartzberg, maybe. Well, he was what, 7 or 8?
61, he would have been 10.
10. He could have asked that question.
Hmm.
There were very few children in the path, but
yeah.
what the guide talks about there, about that there are many different aspects of the self within us that want different things. You know, it's like that Disney movie, Inside Out.
Mhm.
You saw that, where we are, you know, you can love and hate at the same time. You can love and hate the same person at the same time. And that is very true and very interesting also.
Yeah. Did you notice in that same answer that the guide mentions that you hate only because you are hurt?
Yes,
That is really,
yes.
that is one heck of an edict. Like, it's really super clear. Because if you can come to terms with the fact that you felt vulnerable or infringed on or something, and you can at least admit that to yourself.
Right, someone should have told that to Hitler.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
That's why you hate, because you were hurt,
Yep, yep.
not because these guys are,
It was just amazing when I read that. I was like, holy smokes.
yeah.
So and then, you know, when it's, but I made a mistake and I was reading, what was it, 80? this is
87.
87.
Oh, here, Joe, let me bring the,
I'll come over here.
come over here, come over to my,
Come over by Juan. Yeah. So there was this discussion, I think it was in 87, it might have been here, about how the child, you know, misunderstands things. Our feelings are functioning at a very simple, undeveloped level. And so the child oftentimes thinks that something has been done to them, but it hasn't actually been done to them. They may actually, our recollection of what took place may never have actually taken place. So as we mature and we're trying to make sense, we look deeply at what was going on when we were children, how we were responding, it may be that we weren't really capable of understanding what was taking place. And so that's important too, that there are these confused emotions and responses and what we're telling ourselves about what those things were. Right. So our higher self needs to kind of guide us and help us in meditation to try to reinterpret some of these things.
Exactly.
thank you. All right, Bill, do you have any thoughts? Anything you might want to share?
Well, to be honest with you, you seem like you're a little bit ahead of me on this, on the emotions. I don't know if this is going to help at all, but what happened was I had a flashback to when I was a child, and you know, it was very, very scary. And I've never been able to get to the bottom of it, even though I've been seeing therapists on and off. I went to the Seven Oaks down there to work on it, and I just resist getting to the bottom of it. You know, I don't know why I'm so afraid of getting there, but it's like, to me, it feels like it's impossible to get there. That's how it feels.
You mean to experience the emotion you felt at that time?
Yeah. Because all I know now is that whenever I get really scared or terrified, I freeze. I don't have fight or flight. I freeze. And that's what happened when I was a child. I froze. And that still happens to me not today, you know, sometimes.
It's a long road we have to travel. Sometimes the guide says many incarnations sometimes are needed. But I mean, to become aware is the first step, right?
Yeah, yeah. But, I've been, well, kind of aware of it since the first flashback, and that was about 30 years ago, and I'm still stuck there. It happened to me when I was between 3 and 4, and I didn't realize it happened until 30 years later, when I had the flashback.
You mean you didn't remember what had happened until 30 years later when you suddenly
Yes.
recalled it?
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
That's how far down I guess I repressed it,
Mhm.
And it makes you freeze now, the memory of it?
When I feel I'm in a situation I can't control or out of control, I still get the freeze. Um, it will pass, but I know when it first happens. Just to give you an example, when I was young, I was in the cellar playing with my cousins, and we were playing with matches, which wasn't a good idea. But there was a box with linen curtains in it, and one of the matches went in there and lit it on fire. Now, all I could do was sit there and stare, and my younger cousin, he was the one who put it out, and he said to me, "Why didn't you do anything?" And I couldn't answer it. I was frozen. That's how I can get.
Mm,
Um,
mm. Yeah, these are deep things that happened when we were children.
Yeah.
About the same age that you were. My brother died at a fire.
Oh,
I wasn't there. I was in New York, but I heard about what happened, and I created all kinds of memories, even though I wasn't there at the time. But these things live in you through your life. They do.
Mm. Bill, nowadays, do you have experiences where you have a similar freeze?
I not right now, no, but when I was at work, when a situation came up that I was supposed to
Mhm.
react to, and I didn't know what to do, I would freeze.
And
It would just overtake me.
is it also internal, the freezing that you notice? That can you verbalize how you were feeling in that moment?
No, it's
Yeah.
just like complete paralysis. That's how I felt.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Here on page,
Yeah, one.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, maybe this will help a bit, Bill. On page 6 of the lecture, Alan actually went through it earlier. But what it says, by going through the period that was missed in childhood and adolescence, the emotions will finally mature, and you will no longer need to fear the power of those emotions, which you cannot control by merely putting them out of awareness. So according to this, I mean, it seems that maybe the way, something that can help in your situation is by going back to that childhood, to that experience, since you, by the grace of God, you already have it, or you brought it to awareness, and maybe trying to go back to the childhood experience and kind of like go through it, mentally, and just like bringing yourself back to that, to wherever you were, even what you were wearing, the clothes you were wearing at that time, or the age you were at that, at that time when you had these experiences, and just going back to that and really feel what you felt now that you are an adult, and going back to that child, the little one, and experience those emotions or experience that you had. And according to the guide, as he keeps saying here, so you no longer fear, but you will be able, he says, to trust them and to be guided by them. For that is the final aim of mature and functioning, and a well-functioning person. So basically, I think the way I understand is that, by going back and reliving those experiences that we had, that was so traumatizing and so painful, and as you said, you are so afraid to go back and feel them, because you really feel that, it's gonna be painful. It's gonna, you even probably subconsciously feel that this even may destroy you. So you really feel it and fear it, and you have the right. I mean, this is normal. But by going back and really relieving that experience and putting yourself back into that situation, that may help, according to what I understand here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, Marion, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate everybody sharing. There are two things I want to share, and that is because this is so individual, and as you've brought up, Alan, is that the personality types, what's the dominant personality type, is going to affect how we approach anything. And I dug those lectures out today, reason, will, and emotion feels so vital. And something that the guide, because I don't have it in front of me to say I'm quoting the guide. I just remember from Pathwork studies that the difference between fear and terror being the feeling of this, that one will be annihilated. I'll be annihilated if I experience certain aspects. It goes back to childhood, why we created a fence in the first place, because I feel I'll be annihilated and not exist. And that's so anti who I am, because I am pure spirit. I am spirit. So for the little child in the world of duality, it's like, I won't exist if something or other happens. So I have to create my defense. And it's going to be whatever my dominant one is. It'll be all three aspects, but I'll have a dominant one. So I wanted to mention that first, the distinction between some fear and some terror, because sometimes that is not discernible unless having done energy work and know what that feels like in the subtle body, in the energy field. We can't always make these distinctions. So that's why the energy work is so important. And then also the guide stressed that when, and I'm paraphrasing, when unraveling certain issues that are images, like in the image lecture, you don't do that work alone. You must, because you're letting go of some old way. You haven't yet grounded the new way. And there's a feeling you're going to fall. It's like the Abyss of Illusion lecture. Feel like you're going to fall in the alligator pit. So need somebody standing, somebody holding that energy for us when we go to those places. And it's very individual. You may have a helper, a therapist, or a friend, whatever. I've done so much work. I don't have to do everything with another person because I know how to ground myself and connect with my higher self and state my intention. But how important that is to know if you're shifting and letting go of something like from childhood. And so when I would have, often when I have a worker, I would, because the guide also uses the word life or death before using life and death. And the individualized self sphere of the psychology is life or death. I'm the child. If I don't get that cookie, I'm going to die. And so the guide used that word die because it's the death, feeling like the death of the self, like you're going to die from it. And so, and also another clue is things I long for that I'm not fulfilled about. That's always on the side of death. If I go for what I long for and I'm having a really hard time fulfilling it, there's some place I feel like I'll just die if I do that. And for me, it's writing a book that I'm working on, taking so much effort because I feel like it's going to make me visible. I don't want to be visible. I learned that to be with God, I got to be invisible. And I'm going to write this book and be visible. And it's like, please give me a break. So I used to put a line, like a string, down the middle of my office floor, and then have somebody write out on a chart on the wall, on the board, of their longing and where they are now, status quo versus longing. And knowing that the longing side is going to be on the death side and the status quo is going to be the life. I'm trying to stay on this side to stay alive. I don't want to go over to the longing side because, and then there's this unconscious and a conscious of each side of that duality. And so I would, for energy work, have them shift back and forth, like to fulfillment of that longing, and go to step across that line into the death side, step into death. And then after a while, when it feels uncomfortable, step back into the life side, which is to keep the status quo going without fulfillment. And the shift back and forth was so safe for most every type of the reason, will, and emotion type because of the slow and the back and forth and the having choice to move back and forth. So I'm just stressing, so there are a lot of tools. There are a lot of tools that can be used in this way. And the last thing I want to say is that my dominant defense is the emotion type, and the original pain is not having enough protection, not feeling protected as a child. So I hear, after all these decades of working on myself, working on this, doing all the energy work, there's a prayer I say that my spiritual master has given. And the first two words are preserver and protector of all. And then it goes on. It's saying what attributes of God are. I have worked on myself so long. And about 2 weeks ago, I say this prayer every morning, and I'm saying, oh God, the preserver and protector. And that word protector, an energy went through my whole body as though I'd never heard that word before. And I stopped and I just allowed that presence and that power and that consciousness to be there with me. And it has changed. It's still there, as though I never heard that word protector. And that's the core of what was missing with my defense type, was not having enough protection. The will type and the reason type, they're different. We all have all three, but that's not their dominant one. My dominant one is, and I wasn't. And so I thought, after all these decades of working on myself, came that morning saying that prayer when I said protector, flooded through me. And so I've been affirming as I go out. If I feel a little doubt about something, I'll just say, I am protected. I am protected. And if I'm talking to God, I'll say, I'm grateful for your protection. If I'm aligned with my higher self, I am protected. So I just want to say, just as you said, Alan, these things can take a long time, a lot of these things. Here I am at my age, after doing all this work, waking up to allowing this really, really expanded moment of light flowing through me about protection, that word. It was such grace, so much grace. So it comes at unexpected times, the grace, as we do this work and get grounded in it. So that's it. That was my sharing.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask Marion to clarify something. Can you just clarify again the longing, what you said about the longing creates the death, the connection between longing and death? Can you just
Yes.
verbalize it again?
The guy uses the word life or death. And then when you're open to both of them, it's life and death. That's a little bit more centered place where you have an opening more to the unit
But
of
the
state.
longing is the longing for what
The
you
longing
you
is
really
something
want.
that I've wanted and I have trouble fulfilling it, whether it's to go on a trip or write my book or find a mate or whatever it is, whatever that longing is. And we have more than one. We have more than one longing. But in charting it out in a graph for a person to move energetically, the unfulfilled longing is always on the side of death, of life
The
or death.
unfulfilled longing feels like that annihilation.
I feel like I'll
Okay.
die if I have that success.
If you have, that's what I was trying to process. If you have the success or if you can't achieve
If I
it.
have it, I will die from it. Now I'm successful in many ways, but I always have another longing comes up of something.
That's why you're resisting it. Is that so?
Yes, because I'll die, I'll be annihilated. It's the child consciousness. I won't exist if I go over there to the longing. As the adult thinking, it's wacko, but to the child, it's sensible. If I go do that thing, I'll die from it. And yet I long for it because as part of my character, I have talents about that. I will be so much happier if I fulfill that.
Well, maybe it's the death of the ego, really.
It's the death of the ego. Yeah.
Thank you for all this. It's like really
like surrendering, surrendering, it's like, no. I want to stay over here with the unfulfillment and the pain of that because it's more familiar and feels safer than going there in that new territory.
That's a beautiful thing. Yeah, to look at that, the unified state, unit of state, what the threat to the ego that is.
Yeah.
Well,
Steve.
I'd like to say here, sorry for the video being off. I have a bit of a fly-by-night operation here in Florida. I don't have enough bandwidth for video and everything else. But anyway, this lecture really interested me because not experiencing my feelings is a very painful experience. I grew up with a void of experiences of my feeling and emotion, and I realized at an early age that the greatest pain is actually not feeling. I also understood at an early age that I was covering up my feelings because they were too difficult to experience, and maybe that's what saved me. And part of that, I think, is growing up in a very traumatic household where I had to encapsulate my feelings in my life and decide that I couldn't trust anybody. Possibly I can trust myself, but I was young, I didn't even know that. But I had to do the best I could by myself because my world was very different than anybody else's. And it was a very difficult situation. And that thrust me into the business world and travel. As I've said here many times, it informed my life, a very lonely, nomadic life where I really didn't want to touch anybody emotionally, nor did I want anybody emotionally to touch me. And if I expressed any emotion or caring, it was really intellectual. It was only to manipulate and to get what I wanted. But I never really experienced that feeling that I was verbalizing. And I knew that. And that also felt very painful because I realized I was manipulating and cheating the other person. Because I knew what the other person wanted, a relationship and a marriage, children, a home. And I didn't want that. But in order for me to have that relationship, which always ended, of course, I had to feign that this was what I wanted, or this was at least what I was open to. I couldn't say I wanted it because even that was way beyond what I could say, but I was open to, and then knowing very well that it would end, and it would also end because, oh, by the way, I have a trip coming up and I'm not going to be here very long. And, I'm sorry, but I'll be back, which is very easy to say. And I did come back maybe months later. It was all irrelevant and superficial. So this lecture really resonated with me. The thing I don't hear in this lecture is compassion. Where does compassion come in for oneself? I think compassion is an important element of growth. And I think that's one of the areas that concerns me with the path work to some extent. I may be missing something, but I don't hear a lot of the word compassion and caring for oneself. I hear things that I need to do and so on. And much of what I hear resonates with me. But the other question that comes up for me is you don't know what you don't know. When I'm embroiled and in my cocoon of not caring or not wanting to experience the caring, I don't know how to get out of it, nor do I wish to, because it's too frightening, the other side. So as long as my life continues, which it did, in this cocoon of, oh yes, sweetheart, I understand. Yes, I'm open to that. Oh, I'm open to whatever you want. It's just that I want to sort of consolidate in a way this relationship, and then I know I'm going to be gone anyway, so what's the difference? And it's a difficult place to be because at some level I knew this wasn't going to work, and it really didn't work to any great degree, but I survived. And maybe that's all I really want to do. It's not only did I survive, but I survived well, if one was to look at my life from the outside, until I basically felt suicidal, that I felt so alone. And I realized I had to really start looking at this And I don't think one can grow out of that quote cocoon without help. Because again, we don't know what we don't know. And I really needed outside help, whether it's a pathwork helper or a therapist. And I read innumerable amount of books, and the reading is one thing, but it stays somewhat intellectual. And I really needed another human being to at least start to trust. And what allowed me to start to open up a door in that cocoon was a therapist, one that I could actually trust and start to open up to. And that started to allow a sense of, wow, maybe there's another way. But obviously it took years to do. And then I became a therapist, as Joel knows, in the area of Gestalt. And I thought that was another way of opening up my heart to others. And to some extent I did, but not to the degree that was really necessary to be. I think I was a really good therapist for some, and for others, I frankly didn't care that much. And I realized that, I was probably not benefiting some patients and benefiting others. And my self-interest started to encroach on it. And I felt, you know what, I'm not that interested in any of this, so I'll leave. And I did. And then it brings me up to now. And I am in a relationship now where I'm finding that opening my heart has really allowed me to flourish. And I'm questioning myself right now is, how did I evolve from a person that had a heart that was closed? And I was married for 3 years. And after 6 months, there were others. We'll leave it at that. To this relationship, which is diametrically opposed to what I'm accustomed to. I'm not really sure, frankly, how I evolved from one to the other. I think it was a mixture of things. Maybe a therapist, more than anything else, I think it was pain. Experiencing the pain of being encased in that cocoon and feeling at one point either end it, take my life and end it, or start to expose myself to reality, to other ways of being, and find some way of living that was more meaningful. And fortunately, I took the latter role of really facing my fear and looking at these things. And again, I don't think I could have done it alone. So I think it's very important to have a companion through this, at least the early phases and stages, and then it creates a momentum where one, I think, with enough knowledge, can carry on in their own way. And what we're doing tonight is just furthering my own knowledge of who I am, what I want to be, and integrating with other people, which I could not do earlier on in any deep way. Yes, I did it in an intellectual way. Yeah, I could say yes, no, talk, sound intelligent, but I don't care about those people. They're meaningless to me. Anyway, I won't be around long enough to care, which is very different than tonight, which I do see and experience each one of you. Totally, I don't know, but certainly do experience you. So anyway, that's what I have to say, and I thank you, whatever.
I just want to make a quick comment about compassion. I'll make it very quick because I don't know what lecture it is. It's been so long ago, and every lecture is different, but there was one where it was very clear the stages of loving. And I used to have a little circle on my refrigerator with 3 arrows going around in a circle. First stage is, and I think the guide used nurturing. I think the guide used the word nurturing. And the first one was being nurtured. Not self-nurtured or nurturing others. The first one was being nurtured, then nurturing the self and nurturing others. Now, it's not linear. So in different areas of our life, we're doing different things at different time. Areas where I really need a lot of empathy and compassion given to me. and then I can find it in myself and give it to others. It's not linear, but I used to have that, and I don't know what lecture it was in, but
Right.
that led.
No,
maybe you-
thank you. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, it's so important where you feel you're not, really, loved. It needs to come from the outside, not by demanding and getting and grabbing and that, but of allowing that. And so I remember one of my dear friends who's no longer living, Joy Hubert. Alan knew her, Joy.
I remember her.
She was always at the leading edge of every new thing that came out, and we'd all gather in her apartment and watch him on a video and all that. And that was nonviolent communication. Now we have a wonderful communication lecture in the Pathwork. And when Marshall Rosenberg developed nonviolent communication, he said it wasn't new. He used aspects from 3,000 years ago. So we do have other tools that sometimes we do incorporate, in our work, or a helper might, but it just changed my life. The communication lecture in the Path is wonderful. It doesn't have all the tools that he developed, but the first one is about being nurtured, being loved, being nurtured, and then the same as the guide has talked about, first, you have to receive it, empathy, before you can give it out. So that's a good guideline, Stephen, to keep getting as much support as you can. And that's where being a little greedy sometimes helps.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you,
Can I
Marion.
just say some-
Oh,
say something?
Teresa raised her hand. So you want to say something, Teresa? And
I
then-
just wanted to,
Yes. May I?
all right, go ahead.
Go ahead, Teresa.
So I wanted to also respond to Stephen, and I completely agree with Marianne, because I come from a similar background of very difficult, abusive childhood, and therefore, pushing emotions, not being able to rely on anybody, and not having the protection or the compassion. My mother was borderline, so she didn't have any empathy whatsoever, and my father was an alcoholic. So you can imagine the situation growing up. No protection, no empathy of any kind, and a lot of abuse. But the way that I resolve it is, first, I agree completely with Marianne that you have to receive it from anywhere. Therapy works, friends work, anybody that is open to actually nurturing you, it's great. But then working through a Pathwork helper, what I was led to in my sessions, it's a little different, because after you receive that basic nurturing and you actually have the feeling of what it is to receive empathy and nurturing and love even, the second part is she guides you through distinguishing the parts of yourself. So there is this wounded inner child, there is the lower self, and there is the higher self. And the higher self is all love, all empathy, all compassion, all brilliance, all understanding, all knowing. The hard part is for us who are really, really hurt to really make that distinction. Because when I first read, like this lecture is saying, feel the pain, I just wallow in my pain. I just wallow in my pain. Finally, I stopped shoving it down. I would wake up, I feel that heaviness, I feel that pain. I'm like, okay, I gotta feel it to heal it, right? I'm gonna feel it. After talking to a Pathwork lecturer and having private sessions, she told me, no, it's not very productive to just wallow in your pain, because you're wallowing in your pain, but you don't get any, I mean, there is some probably value to feeling it, because just feeling the emotion for us, it's a huge breakthrough, right? Because we used to shut it off and shove it down and not feel. It was too much to feel it. But the thing is, you need to kind of sort of get in touch, distinguish somewhere your higher self, the loving, compassionate part, which we all have. Might be buried, but it's there. And then from that perspective, pray that you're going to nurture yourself, that little child who's deeply wounded and feels that emotion. So what I do now when those emotions come, and they do, and this lecture was brilliant in saying, one thing I wanted to stress that nobody repeated, that unless you have a resolution to those feelings, life will bring those situations around. Just like you brought those relationships around, you had unresolved issues, right? So life will put again and again situations that will bring up this emotion to face up and to feel through. So when those situations comes, when those feeling comes, not only feeling them like wallowing in that pain, which I used to do thinking, I'm getting through, on the other side. But finding that higher self, that compassionate, loving parent in yourself, kind of sort of reparenting yourself, saying, okay, I see your pain, I feel it. Let's shed some light on it. Let's have compassion upon myself. And this is where the compassion comes. It can come from us. It can come from our higher loving, compassionate self towards that little wounded child in us, saying, I hear you, I feel you, I, sympathize with you, I am there for you, I am there in that place with these emotions. I love you in that situation. You have right to feel like this. You have right to express anger. You have right to be this, that, and the hurt and wounded and rageful and angry. You have a right to feel it. Don't act it out on others, but feel it. And I kind of sort of find that loving higher part of myself, looking at that wounded little girl in me, saying, I feel you, I hear you, I understand you. You have a right to feel it. You recreated that situation again. Uh, let's deal with it on the emotional level. What do you want to do here? And kind of sort of reparent myself with that compassion and love that I never got from my parents, giving it to my, wounded child self as the grown-up ego, as the grown-up woman, and as the higher loving compassionate self that I am. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Joel, did you want to say something?
It's a little, it's all right. We've kind of gone beyond it.
All
Just
right.
let it go. It's fine.
All right. Tracy, did you want to weigh in on the lecture? Here,
Okay, hello.
can you see yourself?
So I had an amazing thing happen with this lecture, which I'm going to try and summarize quickly. It wasn't this time that I read it, it was a previous time. But like the rest of you, I had a difficult childhood. My mother committed suicide, and my entire life, in order to deal with that, I convinced myself that I didn't love my mother and things like that. When I was maybe 36 years old, I was skiing and I came down to the side of the mountain and lost control and badly injured my knee. And for some reason, which I have no idea why, I started to relive in detail that experience of coming down the mountain and feeling, and at some point I knew I was in trouble. And the fear was pretty intense because I knew I was going to fall and hurt myself, which I did. And I went over it and over it and over it hundreds of times. Why I did this, I don't know. I was not a pathworker at the time and had nothing to do with my mother at the time. And at some point, I was free of it. I had gone through it so many times in my mind and allowed myself to feel the intensity of the fear and terror right before I fell, that it dissipated, or to use Marion's word, it pixelated. So this was when I was 36 years old. I was not on a spiritual path. I was very much, in the world, I had 2 young children. I was a lawyer and all that stuff. Now we fast forward to the first time I read this lecture. And I said to myself, I wonder if I could heal myself of the pain of my mother by going over and over and over and over again the last night of her life. So my mother went into the garage after everybody was asleep and she started the car and she died from carbon monoxide poisoning. And I wasn't there at the time. I was here in New York, actually. It was it was 6 weeks before Joel and I got married. But I could imagine piecing together from what I had been told by my brother and my father who were there. And I reconstructed her last moments of her going into her room, and she took off her wedding rings. That was my father's first clue in the morning that something was wrong. When he woke up, he saw her wedding rings, and he went looking for her, and he couldn't find her anywhere. And it was the summer, and it was hot. And at some point, he smelled the carbon monoxide coming from the attached garage. And he told me that he went in there, but didn't look in the car. He looked everywhere in the garage, but he wouldn't, even though he knew in his heart that that's where she was. So I went through this, a very similar process to what I did with when I had hurt my knee. And then at some point, I was free of it. And I could, well, like I can tell you the story now. And it's almost as if I'm telling the story about somebody else. So then I said to myself, this lecture is teaching this, that if we allow these very painful feelings to rise to the surface and not push them away, they start to lose their grip on us. Then the most amazing thing happened after that was I realized that when something happened to me that hurt me, I knew there was a knot in me. I used to use this expression ping, but the ping is just, it's a form of pain. It's a form of being hurt. You're like, or angry or some sort of negative emotion. So I said, well, I was thinking about Marion actually, and I said, she's always talking about the knots and how if you've got these knots in you, then the energy can't flow because it hits this, some people use the analogy of a river and then the stones. So I said, whatever is happening, whatever happens to me, I'm not pushing the pain away. I'm going to just allow myself to feel it. And the most amazing thing started to happen, which was I would feel the pain just like an arrow shot to me, but instead of getting stuck, it passed right through me, so that the pain entered me and it came out like it's like being shot by a bullet that went right through your head or right through, and so you feel it and it hurts, but then the next thing you know, it's come out the other end. And at first I was like, well, where did that pain, it's like, where did that pain go? So I felt it, but it was gone. It wasn't trapped in me anymore. And I realized it was because I didn't put up the defense against it. I just let it penetrate and I let it pass through me. So I guess that's my share.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yes, thank you.
Very valuable.
I call it going through the tunnel of pain rather than tunnel of love.
Yeah,
Going through the tunnel of pain because there's light at the end of that tunnel.
right. And just want to say one more thing to Stephen. I feel all of you too. And I went through my whole life very much like you, Stephen, protecting myself from feeling anything, and how I managed. Poor Joel. We're married 45 years. And I think the first 35 or 40 of those years, he was with a very injured person who wasn't able to absorb and be in a healthy relationship. So I'm grateful that he somehow he didn't
Exactly.
he didn't leave me. But Stephen took that. That was my protection. I wouldn't let anybody near me. I wouldn't let because that way, I couldn't, I believed, of course, incorrectly, that I couldn't be hurt again the way I had been hurt with my mother. And so now I don't need to do that anymore. And I can experience, I hear it in your voice, Stephen. I know exactly. I feel so connected to you when you're speaking, because I've been exactly where you're at, traveling too. I mean, I was a big shot in corporate America, like you were, traveling all over, being a big shot, meaningless life, but I didn't realize it at the time.
Exactly.
and thinking I'm protecting myself. So, but really only increasing the pain because I was by my own actions tightening the knots, which were not allowing the energy to flow into me, not allowing I couldn't feel the love that people had for me. I went my whole life thinking nobody liked me. So
But you're not allowing yourself
yeah,
to feel.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Okay. Have we done it, Teresa? Has everybody had a chance to speak?
Has everyone had a chance to talk? Ellen, you didn't talk too much, did you?
Let's
No, Juan didn't say that much today. Yeah,
On, yes,
he
yes.
did a little bit, but
Cool.
you wanna go first, Juan?
No, you may, please. Then I go after you. Let's see what I can gather.
No.
If
Well,
you- if you're
I'm
okay.
very touched by Tracy's story. It's so sad. So it really very, very touching.
Very heavy.
I I guess I wanted to address this was one of those lectures where right from the start I had this feeling of and I took notes actually. Kind of feeling a little bit like, that like I guess like Stephen, like this, like she used the word that the guide uses a lot, childish and just destructive. It's like childish and destructive, childish and just destructive. I felt like it was like but so I'm having a problem with the premise that all children that so I forget the words exactly because I don't, it's hard to pull it up on my phone. I'm on my computer. Let me just look that children it's like that we somehow all naturally resist emotions that we painful that it's the emotions that are painful, good, bad, unhappy. And I feel like that children without there's almost a tone to it as though it happens in a vacuum. And I know that the work doesn't, I know there's a lot of lectures and it's just the languaging a little bit, but I guess, I'm involved now in doing DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. So I'm kind of very, very involved in what those tools are, so this whole thing about, how the environment, that the invalidation or seeing others. I mean, I guess I feel like all I wanted to do was feel whatever it was. I just was, again, like Marion talks about the types. Obviously, I'm clearly a feeling type. That's my, I'm just, emotions are just at the core of everything for me. And I always just feel like, all I wanted to do was feel. And but because of what you see around you and what you're you see the traumatized people around you trying to, just keep it together, that you just feel like, well, I better do that. So I guess I just feel like there must be different ways that people are, just I'm looking at the notes that I took here. It's
You don't remember any conscious decisions you made not to feel?
No, I feel like my life has been this series of, like this, like kind of a continual process of just wanting to, it's funny because yesterday I wrote a song called Fountain. I am a fountain, yes, I am the rain. Let the water flow enough to finally stop the pain. It's the flow. Here I go, running it higher and higher, going up and go, so it's addressing, the feeling that I'm not supposed to feel feelings, but I feel like if it was just pure Ellen, I would just be, I'm such a feeler, it's like my whole life is, it's like, and it's like the world, it feels like this world. I guess I feel like there's this thing about not in this lecture not addressing the collective, societal and collective. It's like nothing is just the individual, and I know they don't. I know the guy doesn't, but this lecture was confusing to me because to me it's all. I mean, everything that we do is is in relationship. It's just all happens. It's like this is the family, the personal relationships, and the society around us. It's like you can't just it's focus on one thing. So I got confused by that. Yeah, I guess that's. So I don't know. I'm not sure if it's weird. Somewhere in this night tonight, I started to feel like I'm coming down with a cold. So all of a sudden, I feel this like weakness in my body. I don't know how much of that is emotional. It's like I feel like something deep is going on. I mean, obviously, everybody's had very deep sharing. And I feel that, and I'm really, so I feel like.
Can I share something, Ellen?
Yeah.
Just what you're stating, well, it reminds me a lot of some conversations I've had with one of my sisters. I have 3 sisters, 3 brothers, but one of my sisters, I mean, almost word for what you were saying about her experience since she was born, and what she kind of connects with almost innately is just the emotional content of every experience. And it would be foreign to her to live a life where her emotions were blocked in any way. And in fact, tonight I feel like the sharing from Teresa really kind of was exactly the type of work that I did with my sister in order to have her kind of step, I think, more towards a middle ground maybe for her, so that she didn't feel sick or overwhelmed or in some cases wallowing, like Teresa was talking about. All of these overwhelming natures of following the emotional squirrels, let's say, are following the emotions flying through all the time. We lose sight of our center very often, or we can lose sight of our center, right?
Yeah.
And our stability and our ground. And what Teresa shared, I feel like, was a really big thing for my sister to hear back in the day, which was, to be surrounded or to find your that voice within you that can be nurturing and self-nurturing, and that parent, that guiding light to bring that stability. And it's very different for every different person, right? Some people have a tremendously traumatic childhood, some don't, and so forth. But if you're an emotion type, and I don't know, but if that is what tends to bring life constantly at you, and sometimes you get overwhelmed by it, or you find yourself yeah, I guess overwhelmed is simply the best word by it,
Fine.
then then it really helps to in your meditative practice to find that nurturing center, that ground where those things can pass through you. Very simply, like Tracy was saying, that they don't just constantly overwhelm you, but they just kind of flow through naturally, because your identity aren't those things, right? Does that make sense?
That's which is why, finally I'm doing the DBT, because
That's
that's the
great.
big recommended therapy, and they talk about the wise, emotion mind and wise mind. That's their formulation. I mean,
Okay.
it's like all, higher self. I mean, it's like so you find this balance.
That's great.
So
It's really
yeah,
wonderful to hear.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
um,
A
yeah.
little bit of stability is always very welcome too.
Yeah, and then that's, I mean, it's been very clear, my whole life that some, balance, how do you find balance? So I guess this lecture was, but then, again, like I guess like Stephen reacted with the idea of compassion, I guess too, though there still is a question in my mind about ch child, the feelings themselves. There's some contradiction, or at least in the way I heard it, that the child. Oh, the thing about maturity, immaturity, like how it is that I'm having trouble formulating this. I guess I guess there was just so much of a feeling of judgment of the feeling itself that I couldn't find a place where the guide went from, okay, well, it's you know, people stay stuck in childish and immaturity, but yet it's not the feelings that are the problem. And I guess the whole thing of how it is that you go from, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm
Now,
having trouble.
the maturity part that I feel like you're circling has to do, at least from what I read with the guide, in the awareness. Okay, not necessarily about emotional is mature or too much emotion or too little. It's more about the awareness of what emotions are occurring. And if you ask most children, okay, and this is not a judgment on children, it's just their manifesting consciousness, right? But if you ask most children, are you, you know, what's your awareness of what, you know, the emotional landscape of what just happened, it won't be that clear. They will experience the emotion very honestly, maybe, but okay, but it's the maturity that I think the guide is talking about is not to just experience the emotion purely, and
Yeah, no,
just to,
okay, yeah, that
you know,
makes sense.
and
That awareness and
combine an awareness
so
of,
this that addresses it because it's the question is that a faculty of maturity? Because there are some, and I've met like 3 or 4
yeah,
young kids
sure,
who they're like Buddhas, you know,
sure,
and they're
sure.
clearly
Yeah, I
from
would say it's not a factor of physical maturity. So many children can be mature, right? And they are more and more nowadays, I feel. You find many more children who are generally more and more self-aware. But then you have to ask yourself what soul perhaps is being incarnated in that child and what are they ready for? Where are they growing to? But for me, I wasn't necessarily there maybe as a child, but you know, each of us takes a different step. There was just one more small point I wanted to comment back to Bill on, if that's okay as well, Ellen. But Bill, are you still there? I can't tell with the phone just being like that, but I didn't want to necessarily, I wanted to only, are you there, Bill?
Let's see. Yes, I am here.
Okay, super, super. I know you mentioned about, or many of us mentioned about the childhood experience. One of the things that wasn't necessarily said that I feel like was a gold nugget for me is that it's not all, it's important to relive some of those things, but or it's helpful to relive some of those things, but it's important to discern that those things were not the causation for who you are and for what's going on today inside of you. You can relive those things in your current happenings if it's happening again, right? You can meet it today and reflect on how those things seem similar to what occurred back in the day. But it's not like this was done to me and therefore now I'm broken. We're born with a certain, let's say, potential for obstructions inside of our consciousness, which perhaps we chose, perhaps we didn't. But in a sense, as you're going through life, it's a lens to look through for us to look back at our childhood in much the same way that Amy Falchuk has said that the sexual experience is a lens to look through. There are many lenses to look through in order to see what our emotional states might very well entail throughout these traumatic experiences of literal trauma or terror. So if it's shutting off too, you might find it very helpful that you can pray before, I don't mean before the incident, but every day, you know, next time I move into an experience like this, I vow to take a moment and watch or see, I'll prepare myself, you know, and again, it's not about perfection, but it's about intention. So if you can say that intention and stay with that intention daily, then what's going to happen is your awareness during the beginning of that phase will stay more. And then you'll be able to connect that with your youth. Okay?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Well, hold on.
Oh, Juan, go
Oh,
ahead,
yeah,
brother.
sorry, Juan.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
I
It's
lost
okay.
sight.
It's important. It's the energy here that counts, right?
Yeah,
We all
that's right.
here, and that's a great thing. Well, honestly, there is so much to say about this lecture, and I thank you guys so much for picking it, because I have read the 258 lectures, all of them, and I don't recall, honestly, that I have read this lecture. When I read it this time around, it's just like all new to me. And I don't know about, most of us here, but to me, this was one of the most, clear-cut lecture,
Clear.
right, that I have read of the guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he just went like boom,
He
boom,
wasn't
boom, boom,
pulling
boom.
any punches.
Really, it just like, I mean, everything was like so specific, so like right on the dot. I was like, wow, this is incredible. To me, it was very, very powerful lecture, and I was so happy to come across it again. In fact, I don't even have it in I have the file with all the lectures in my home, and I didn't have this one, so I had to go somewhere and print it. It's like, oh, okay. But anyhow, this lecture is so important to me because it talks about something that is very, very important that I can say, I guess I was not in touch with, and that is the actual inner feelings, that feeling of intuitive feelings. That's what I mean, because, and I was a little confused in the beginning, because the guy talks about feelings and emotions. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. So what's really the difference between these two here? You have emotions and you have feelings. And I tried to connect the two, and but what I came to understand was that these feelings are something genuine, like something real, that are there, that cannot be forced, that cannot be self-induced. But emotions are more like on the surface, are more like effects of the feelings. I mean, the anger, you angry, or you depressed, or these other things. It's like this emotion comes from somewhere, and I think they come from inside. And one of the things also that I read somewhere that differentiates feelings from emotion is that feelings you can actually experience only consciously, but then emotions you can experience them consciously and subconsciously. So it was very interesting with all this, but then again, there's so much material here for me, that I had to connect with again, or reconnect to, I should say. But this part of the feelings is something very, very important to me, because I feel that most of my life I grew disconnected with my true feelings. And there's a line here that actually completely, really was like a thunder to me when I read it. And this is on page 6, on the second paragraph here, which you've already read some of it, Ellen and I, where the guy says, since you discouraged their growth, meaning the emotions, you live by your mental faculties only, and they are secondary in efficiency. So when I read that, I was like, this is me. All my life, I was so much into the intellect and all these intellectual items, because like you, I'm more into the self-will and what is it, self-will and emotions. Is it self-will?
Reason.
Self-will and reason, right?
Yes.
So everything I had to reason it out. It's like, but this was so tiresome. So I mean, I was like always tired and weak, when I was doing that, and I was not enough energy to actually allow the true material to come to the surface. So because I was always into this superficial layer of myself, this mental, the ego capacity, to dissolve and resolve things, that I never was able to really allow, just sit down. And this is why, for those of you who do not meditate, meditation is very important for this, to connect with our inner self. When you actually just sit there and just quiet the mind, just sit there, relax, and don't allow any thought to come and disturb you. Just sit there with yourself and just basically concentrate here on the third eye and between the eyebrows, and just be there with yourself. Don't allow any emotions or thoughts or physical emotions, and just be there and just allow that energy to come into you and penetrate you. And you, by doing this, you slowly start to experience some changes within you, and really allow that feeling, intuitive feeling, that intuition to come to the surface. And by the grace of God, I can say this level of my spiritual growth, I am so much more connected with my intuitive feelings, with my true feeling, the feelings of the higher self, that I can almost allow it to just live through me and guide me, because it's such a powerful tool. I mean, we have no idea. I mean, these intellectuals and, you know, so physical, you know, so the material on the surface and intellectualizing and thinking and all these other things that we do with the ego cannot come even near to the power of the, you know, just allowing oneself to permit the intuition to just, you know, like the guy says, live through you and think through you and feel through you. And this can be done, you know, and this is so beautiful when we are able, you know, slowly to just allow this power to really drive us. But it comes, you know, slowly. It's a total process. So what I mean to say is that I am very, very grateful, you know, for all this material because of it that I have reached the little bit of growth that I have reached, and just to allow the, you know, to come to that point where intuition that we can connect with those true feelings within, rather than all these other intellectualization or emotions, which is the one that we allow us to drive us, and really those reactions when we react, you know, every time you you find yourself in a situation either at work or you know, in the regular everyday living, you know, when you interact with other people, when you interact with situation at work and everything, it's just tremendous, you know, the power that these have to just allow that inner feeling to possess you. And then another line here that, you know, the guy says that is so true, the way I feel. As long as you cannot rely on your intuitive processes, you must be insecure and lacking in self-confidence. That is so accurate, so true, you know. Anyway, so I get a little emotional when I share these things, like, because it's so meaningful to me. And another point that I wanted to talk about quickly is about, you know, love. I mean, you know, this is incredible. These two lines was really, really impacting to me. When the guy said, love is the first and the greatest power. In the last analysis, it is the only power. Isn't that something? I mean, to me, isn't that powerful? I mean, that's it. Love is it, you know, love is it. So just as Stephen was saying earlier about compassion, it's like, there it is. Love is that compassion, that caring, that being able to put oneself in someone else's shoes, you know, and really feel the need, the pain and the suffering of that person, you know. This love is everything. So it's just a beautiful thing. I don't know how else to say, but thank you, Alan, and thank you, Tracy, for selecting this lecture. And it's so beautiful, so contributing.
And that is the unit of state in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much to it. It's incredible. But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Juan. God bless. Thank you.
You felt the love, huh? You came here.
Oh, look at that.
She felt the love, this little thing here.
Yeah, let's light the candle and have our meditation. All right, my friends, 15 minutes. Can't do any better than that one.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of love there.
In the last analysis, love is the first and greatest power.
Isn't that something?
In the last analysis, it is the only power.
It is. I mean, that's it. All has been done through that. I mean, guys, I mean, yeah. I'm not saying enough about it. Yeah.
I just watched the unitive state on the couch.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, right there.
Oh, man.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I felt such joy. You touched me.
Thank you. Thank you. Takes one to know one.